our next speaker, who is Daniel Ospina, once again, from R&D DAO. Daniel, are you here?
Hello, everyone. So let me, don't know if we have a host, otherwise I'll just get going. So, for those of you who are not at the previous talk and maybe don't know me, I'm Daniel. I'm an organization designer, come from a background of about 10 years going down the progressive organizations, rabbit hole, self-management, self-organizing, systems thinking, all of those kind of things before we had DAOs, and then discovered DAOs around 2017, 18, and became fascinated with the possibilities of this space to do new things. So I'm going to tell you today, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of these functions I've been seeing in the ecosystem for a while, the framing around those dysfunctions, some of the reasons why I believe that despite the incredible amount of talent and capital, we're still facing some very important challenges to be able to make this DAO dream a reality. And then I'll go to talk about a little bit how we are positioning ourselves and the sort of vision that we're putting forward on how we can address these dysfunctions. So let me share screen. Can I share screen? Yes, wonderful. There we go. And present this thing. Great. So taking it from the top. Let me start with the story of roughly when I was heading Aragon in 2021. I joined that team as originally as a consultant. They had acquired another organization, and they had some tensions that they needed to work through on that integration, like the merger of the two companies. And so I started helping them with that. Then as we were working there, one of the things that essentially became self-evident as I was consulting for them was that we had at the time mostly a team of engineers and a couple of business people trying to create organizational technology and governance technology. And there wasn't necessarily anyone who had an understanding of, like a deep understanding of governance and had studied these fields. And I mention it not to single them out, but more because it's a pattern that's been extremely common across the ecosystem. And we still see today a lot of layers two launching, or even new layers one, that give a tremendous amount of incentive for developers. But there have been historically in Web3 nowhere as much incentives for non-developers to come into the ecosystem. So we're lucky to have some extraordinarily talented and visionary and passionate developers who have made a lot of these possible. But at the same time, there is multiple bodies of thoughts from other disciplines have been missing in the ecosystem. And that was very much the case of Aragon at this point. So as we started working together and I started to pitch a little bit the importance of social sciences and bringing other perspectives into it, they'd end up opening this position for me. And I shortly joined after the team to encounter that we are halfway in the process of launching a product called Aragon Govern that was based on the idea of optimistic governance. But unfortunately, from a governance point of view, it hadn't been fully well conceived, and the user research turns out it wasn't reliable. So when the product launched, absolutely no one ever used it, despite putting about 100,000 worth of bounties, essentially incentives for people to adopt the product. No one really did. And so it's a very, very, very unfortunate situation that we end up there, where there was all of these tremendous amount of talent, of work, of energy, of capital that had been put to generate a new tool that then wasn't used. And again, this is not to single them out, but more to point that this is a pattern that I have kept seeing over and over in this ecosystem, where we have the same thing in hackathons, where people gather, start building a thing, and then they prototype something, but was it ever needed? And so much of what we're getting out of this traditional entrepreneurship approach is leading us in this direction of creating things that no one wants and that are not really usable. and kind of like the downside was we also coming from this pattern of that at the early stages, we needed to build so much infrastructure that the vision needed to be so far ahead that it was very, very hard to test that vision. But now, as we have built the layers of infrastructure and we're getting up more to layers of application, we start to have more possibilities to test, to research, and to inform what we are doing with other bodies of knowledge, hopefully. And so the and so essentially we end up having that pattern of a little bit silos. And as we have learned as an industry, the more and more about it, we have different DAO tooling projects and so on that start to hire one researcher in-house, or when there was a little bit more money to do bounties and so on, to put different bounties for research and so on. But what we usually mean for research at this case is very frequently looking for best practices or looking for what other DAOs are doing, which can give us some insight related to what people want, what they might want to accept, but doesn't give us a lot of information about what actually works. And I mean really works, because what we have right now is a sort of DAOs in beta mode, or MVP DAOs. We've been working at it for a while, but there is still a tremendous way to go. And if we start looking for best practices when what you have is early stage experiments, your best practices are going to be that of early stage experiments, aka not very good. And on the other hand, there are no mature, fully functioning DAOs that are doing everything perfectly that we can simply copy paste. What we're trying to do is more boil these things down to first principles, figure out what are the patterns that really, really make a difference from first principles, and then let's go and try those as an experiment. So it's not quite a best practices approach. So when we start to have all of these different DAO tooling projects starting to hire researchers and so on, they were mostly doing it in an ad hoc manner without a lot of research expertise in between them, because all had limited resources to do proper research. Proper research is unfortunately expensive, and you need multiple disciplines to have a variety of angles to understand how the economics of it, the group psychology, the systems approach, like the game theory approach, and so on. And so we end up with a lot of research that was not quite getting there in terms of quality. And that was coming from a lot of fragmentation, because when we have an ecosystem that is a lot of very small projects, each doing their own thing, we have a tremendous rate of experimentation. And thankfully, we have more transparency here than we ever had before. And yet, one of the big limiting factors is how much knowledge exchange we still have, so that we're learning from each other's failures and successes. And we can get that to a degree, but we get that to the degree of, let's say, two people in the same incubator cohort chatting with each other, but not at all the same degree of two people in the same team working together, where you can start to merge a database, put it in common, so that you don't reinvent the wheel and don't run twice the same research. And so with these decentralization of the space, we also have, with the unfortunate side has been a lot of fragmentation. Obviously, there has been positive sides, as I was saying, the rate of experimentation and so on, but we also have a tremendous amount of fragmentation. And big part of that was also happening, and when we had some of these early protocols, early tools, like, for example, Aragon, that was around since 2017, is that you could get such an influx of people interested in DAOs. And some of these people coming in, they're extremely capable. They could be founders, leaders in their own regard of their own organization. But the early tokenomics incentives, the way we organize them, and even coming from Web2 culture, is that founders take a gigantic proportion of the upside. So when someone comes in and goes that there is an opportunity here, the incentive for them is to go and start another one, especially if you see that the incumbent still has many challenges, still has many gaps. Then you go like, well, you know what? Maybe we can do it better. So instead of joining Aragon as a contributor, I'm going to go and start my own Aragon, because I see that they have challenges in culture, in onboarding, in processes, in systems, that the product is not quite there yet, and so on. So let me start my own DAO stack or my own DAO tooling on whichever vertical that we're talking about. The issue with that is that then this new person ends up in the same situation as the incumbents, is that you end up having to face a lot of those same challenges of having either limitations around capital or talent or the amount of insights and networks that you have, and so on. And so we end up dividing the pie further. And we continue with this dividing the pie logic, which was fundamentally what meant that the original incumbent was not able to incentivize properly new people coming in so that they would join as opposed to compete. And this has led to a whole host of different DAOs doing very, very similar things. In some occasions, because they fundamentally had a different thesis on how to go about it, but in many situations, more because of an issue of quality that comes down from being able to collect enough resources, talent, and so on to really deliver on the vision. So fundamentally, we're still having this fragmentation and a lack of collaboration that would allow us to take these to the next level and to create really, really, really good DAO tooling and DAO processes and systems and services and so on that enable DAOs to function. So we're still in a situation where people wanting to start DAOs are having to figure out a tremendous amount of things by themselves and having to bolt together different tools, each of them with still a huge number of limitations, and having 20 options, but all of them very limited, all of them with tremendous amount of gaps, as opposed to having, let's say, 4, maybe 3 options, each of them really good, just with a very different thesis. So as I was saying, we have the fragmentation, we have the depth, the amount of how much these teams can go down and really, really understand these problems. And the third issue is one of focus. When you're going and trying to build a startup, fundamentally what we have in the ecosystem is a lot of startups. When you're trying to build them, is that you need to build a sustainable business model, either a product or a service with a revenue model or something that will allow these new organizations to become sustainable. And at the same time, you need to build the organization that can deliver that product or service or otherwise that offering. If you only do one of the two, you're not going to survive. You can have a great idea for how the business works, but you don't have the organization to support it. You're not going to be able to progress it, and very soon you stagnate. On the other hand, we have had a lot of organizations built that had no product, no service, no business model really, and now they're struggling after the first bit of funding, the first ICO money or so on starts to run out. They're struggling for sustainability, and that brings us like to the super complicated challenge that is trying to do both product innovation and organizational innovation at the same time. Because if we want to build a product for DAOs, what makes the most sense is for us to be a DAO ourselves, to be as close to our customers as possible. A lot of great products are built by people who are solving their own problem, but the majority of people are not themselves a DAO. They're a lone entrepreneur or something like that. And if you try to incubate a product within a DAO, then you end up competing with whatever the topic of the DAO is. And you have some tension there for resources and attention, and whether the systems and processes and culture and so on are actually organized to nourish that new product incubated within the larger DAO, or whatever the larger DAO was originally set up to do. So because we cannot focus on only one of these things, we end up spread really, really thin when we're trying to build DAO tooling as an entrepreneur, and end up then having to make a compromise somewhere. So either you build a product that is less good. So for example, you do less research, less innovation, and just try to copy paste something from Web 2. And if we continue down that route, we're going to end up with corporations on chain, as opposed to really enabling a new breed of organization that is better for all stakeholders involved and so on. Or otherwise you compromise in the organizational side and copy more traditional organizational practices. Here is largely how, or if thinking from this angle, we could start to explain how the progressive decentralization idea took so much hold and why it was so attractive. Is that if you're having to, if you have two problems competing for your attention, the product innovation or business model innovation, and on the other side, organizational innovation, how much of a traditional organization or how much of a new DAO, new breed of organization you are. And if you have these two problems competing for you, then the idea was like, well, let's first build the community and the product, and only later we're going to start to decentralize and figuring out how to be a DAO. And that can more or less work, but then it creates a tremendous amount of organizational debt. The same way as you can have product debt. Let's say if you want to build, I don't know, a product that enables people in your DAO to give loans to one another. And what you start building is a communication tool that enables people to create chat groups. I mean, there is nothing to say that you cannot migrate these chat groups tool to then later on be the other one, but certainly you're going to have a whole bunch of technical debts that you're going to have to sort through, and this is going to slow you down. And it's going to take a tremendous amount of work and investment and so on to address. The same way with an organization becomes self-reinforcing and self-fulfilling. Once you start to create a traditional top-down hierarchical organization where one person leads and other follows, you create a culture of fellowship, and you create processes and systems for accountability of fellowship. So you can have your OKRs, you can have your performance bonuses, you can have traditional salaries, you have a management structure that operates that way, you have roles, and essentially everything that is about building the organization, as well as the type of people that you attract that can work in that sort of organization. Then on the other hand, if you're trying to build a self-organizing culture, like a more DAO-like culture, you need people who can craft their own job description, who can write a proposal about what it is that they're doing, that they can figure out how to decide whether they focus on at the meta level of like sense making, what are the pieces of work that are needed, or they can focus on doing one piece of the work, and they're not going to get too confused and too lost in between those different possibilities that they end up delivering no value. All of that requires developing a set of skills, processes, systems, and culture to enable that to work. And unfortunately, what we've been doing is, okay, let me start cooking Chinese fried rice. And halfway through cooking Chinese fried rice, I'm going to decide that actually I'm making a Greek salad. And I'm going to try to turn my Chinese fried rice into Greek salad, thinking that there is not going to be a baggage to it. So anyway, that brings us down to this third problem of having to focus in between two things at once. And so fundamentally, we cannot focus and do one really, really well. And so this creates quite a bit of mediocrity, despite extraordinary talent of everyone involved in these systems. Like, don't take me wrong, this is not to blame on the individuals. It's more to say that systemically, we have a huge challenge here that is really hard to do, where we need very deep research, where we need to collaborate across because the challenge is very complex. And when we have to solve multiple challenges at the same time, including how we do rewards and compensation, how we do governance, how we do onboarding in a somewhat permissionless way, how do we do communications management of that on top of business model innovation? So it's no small challenge, but this can come to explain a little bit of how we end up in this situation that we're in, that still after about 5-6 years of working on enabling DAOs, it still seems like we have a gigantic way to go. So we've been over the last couple of years with some of our collaborators. I'm very lucky to have a really wonderful group of humans to work with. We've been pinching over this challenge and trying to understand these dysfunctional patterns and what can we do to help shift a little bit the direction of the ecosystem and alleviate some of these problems. And fundamentally, we boil it down to this framing of the problem. That is a quote that I'm taking up from a psychological study related to community. And it goes, we simultaneously desire to be unique while we also want to belong to a collective. And these two approaches of like the unique, the going it alone and the ease that that enables versus the collective with the sense of belonging, with the more of the sum of the parts possibilities that it has to it, with all that we could achieve together, but also all the challenges of coordinating, is the fundamental tension that we're trying to navigate as we go about Web3 entrepreneurship and essentially inventing and building DAOs. In Web2, we cited a lot more for the being unique. The entrepreneur goes alone, they do their thing, they try to keep as much equity to themselves, and it's a very splitting the pie mentality, where the more equity you can keep, the better you are. In DAOs, we were at some point going the extreme opposite way, is everyone comes, everyone who participates in any way will get airdrop a token, and this somehow is going to enable us to collaborate. But the downsides of the collectivism we're not taking as much into account. That is, the more people we have, the more we involve them, then we actually need to find a way to work together, the processes and systems. So unfortunately, we're starting to shy away from this more collective approach, this more collectivist logic, and concluding, I would argue, too fast that it doesn't work, that it's too hard, that instead of that, we need to go back more to the individualist logic and go more progressive decentralization. It's first, let me work only with the people I want. I tell people what to do. We operate as a traditional team. And then once the thing is built, I'll give it for the community, but only once it's built, without taking into account the issue of moving from Chinese fried rice to then be a Greek salad, and realizing that these two things are not the same. So the solution that we are arguing towards is to fully embrace this more collectivist approach, but with a really strong understanding of its challenges and really embracing the challenges it takes, where the obstacle is the way sort of thing, where we realize that if, for example, creating a permissionless mechanism for people to join and contribute to a DAO creates a lot of noise, let's embrace that noise and ask ourselves, why is that noise happens? And then, like we were discussing in the panel earlier on today, the noise largely happens, the proposal that don't make any sense largely happens because we still have a too centralized decision-making mechanism, so it doesn't have the bandwidth to be able to process those many proposals. And then on the other side, because our information management system, because the way we communicate, we agree on what the strategy is and communicate it to the people and provide them all the context that they need to understand what are the real pain points and issues that are happening in this DAO, is still too centralized, is not really operating in a way that can enable all of these people wanting to contribute to do so in an effective way. So if we really understand the challenges of this collectivism, for example, the challenge of the permissionless is that then all of these other people need to have tremendous amount of context, and we need to have really robust onboarding processes to enable it, then we can actually start to think of solutions for this new paradigm of organizing that we're trying to build here, as opposed to just shying away and going back to the previous paradigm, or on the other hand, trying to find a middle point in between the two that is quite tricky to navigate and might not have the benefits of one or the other. So we started a little bit over a year ago, DAO, with the idea of let's be very DAO from the get-go, so that we can suffer from all the challenges. And the more we suffer from these challenges, the more we can think about solutions to them. And the idea is not to reduce the challenges by operating in a different model, is more to take a first principle approach and understand how the solving of these fundamental challenges is precisely the sort of solutions that we need to do, that we need to come up with to enable this collective dream of better organizations that are not plutocratic, that are not captured by a minority, that are more collaborative, and so on. So we come not so much to the idea of out-collaborate the competition, but more to collaborate for excellence. So before I was talking about the shallowness and the lack of focus as we try to do organizational innovation and product innovation at the same time. So what we're trying to do now, the thesis that we're putting forward for the ecosystem and what we're trying to enable as a platform to provide an example and prove that this model can work is not only that we try to be more collaborative so we beat the competition, but rather that we reduce the amount of competition by welcoming those who could be your competitors. We're talking about these other talented people who come into the community and could be the founders of their own regard, so that they can leverage the resources that we have already to build their own thing using us as a platform. So the organization becomes a platform for others to join and grow it and expand it and develop it and mature it and create the next thing, so that all of the challenges that we are having are actually ripe opportunities for new people to come in and solve those challenges, but not solve them in isolation, not solve them as someone who comes and does user research and then goes and has to figure out all the other challenges on their own. Because let's say if someone is trying to figure out rewards and compensation in DAOs, they're still going to need to work as a team, as an organization, to be able to provide that solution. And at the moment that they're a team and an organization, they're going to start having challenges of how do I attract people to my community? How do I onboard them? How do we make decisions together? And all the other challenges. So if instead of every single entrepreneur, every single organization is trying to solve these on their own, we can create this platform, a sort of collaborative network of projects where different pockets are focused on different challenges, and together we help each other on the challenge. Through more collaboration, we can actually improve the quality of what we are doing, not only at the product level, because we suddenly have a testing ground for ideas, but also at an organizational level. Thanks to being able to focus on problems and collaborate together on solving problems. So it's not a collaboration on that everyone works together on everything, but it's also it's more a sort of collaboration of a division of labor where different groups specialize in different problems. And whenever I get insight or information that helps that group, I direct it and funnel it to them. And then I try to facilitate their work of solving that challenge for myself, for themselves, and for the others in the network. But I don't try to do it myself as well, because I'm already focused on another problem. And so with that idea, we're coming to the concept that is not so much solving or inventing Web3 through entrepreneurship, but inventing Web3 through intrapreneurship, through doing this entrepreneurship together and creating and redesigning our organizations, the already existing organizations, so they can be hyper welcoming and hyper enabling for these new resources, which touches every single process and system and metric and every element of the organization, starting from how much tokens or how much equity or capital the founders get as opposed to other people. We need to start to level the playing field there so that those joining can still get significant upside if they add significant value, to the sort of processes that enables them to gain context and influence very quickly. Because if the only way to join your community is to first do a Twitter post and then write a blog article, and then maybe you can have a tiny bit of responsibility, and only after a year of doing mostly free work and earning a couple of bounties, then suddenly you're able to have a say in governance or a say in the strategy or product or one of the, let's say, big impactful decisions. Well, it's only very few people who can afford for a year to do tiny minnow work before they can do that which they are already trained for. So who you're going to get is going to get a lot of people who can do the small work and then grow progressively. But those who already have very significant experience and very significant talent, they're going to go somewhere else. So we start to also redesign our onboarding processes, not to make them fully frictionless so that anyone without context can come and have a say in governance, but rather so you can gain context really quickly. And if you have a specific expertise, reduce the time that it takes to apply them. And so that if you have an idea on how to improve the work that any of these units is doing in their specific problem, we want to make it as easy for you as possible to come and deliver that idea, that insight, that suggestion to improve it in a way where we're not creating the tribalism of you're an outsider and we're insiders and insiders have more status and so on. while at the same time appreciating the people who have consistency. So the tricky bit of balancing this challenge, balancing these two needs, but enabling the people from the outside to come in, contribute, and be rewarded for it. Because unless we can be very clear on how they receive value, of how they participate in the upside, of how we're not getting 100x the value thanks to their labor, because what we're creating otherwise is a system of exploitation, another Ponzi scheme of labor, that instead of that create a more level playing field, what we end up doing is, yes, we get a smaller slice of the pie as founders and as the people who started it, but we get a smaller slice of a bigger pie because everyone who comes in helps us grow it. And at the end, the smaller slice of a bigger pie is not only more valuable for us, but fundamentally more rewarding, because we're creating value and excellence with everyone around us, and we're creating opportunity. And we get that satisfaction of not only us getting a few million payout out of exiting the venture to then go buy a house, but having a whole community who's also done it with us. And we can continue that, celebrate that journey together. And by providing that opportunity to those around us, then we can start to create a cycle where those looking for growth, looking to contribute their skills and talents, will look for that place that offers opportunity. And so we'll come more to organization and will help grow the pie even bigger for the next cohort and the next generation, and create that positive feedback loop where it's thanks to collaboration and thanks to giving away more of the pie, not throwing it away. This is not airdrops to people who are not to airdrop hunters. We need to do it mindfully to those who are adding value. But if we do it well, again, embracing the challenge is figuring out a very good contribution accounting mechanism. But by giving away more of the pie, we create the feedback loop that is better for us and better for those around us, with, again, a whole bunch of challenges that we need to solve. But hopefully these inspire you to take some of these, apply it to your own organizations, your own pursuits. And if you're interested in what we're doing, we're super open. We pride ourselves on trying to be very welcoming. And if we're not, and you have a better idea on how to do it, please come and help us make it happen. Thank you. Thank you very much.